Joining us now live from studios in Washington is author and historian Dr. Webster Griffin Tarpley. Many thanks for joining us here on Press TV, Dr. Tarpley. Now, first of all, I'd like to get your opinion on how significant do you think is this direct admission being made by Hague that Britain is backing armed groups in Syria and that it is ready to step up its support for them?
Well, he really had no choice. We had the Reuters news agency 24 to 36 hours ago publishing the report that you referred to about the Adana base supported actively by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and of course on Turkish territory. This base was actually made to order during a visit by Saudi Prince Abdulaziz, the deputy foreign minister, who demanded that the Turks open up such a base. The trick with that base is Adana is right next to the Incirlik NATO Air Force Base. It's Incirlik AFB. And the account in Reuters is not certain whether the Adana logistical base for the death squads in Syria is actually on the NATO base. So at that point, it's getting very hard to deny anything. I think we have to look at the behavior not just of the British, but also of Turkey, which has been, I think, breathtakingly irresponsible, examples of real folly in the last couple of days. Erdogan, the leader of the country, made a speech yesterday where he threatened the Syrians with hot pursuit if PKK Kurdish elements from northern Syria raid into Turkey, then he's going to follow them back into Syria. He needs to be reminded that the great principle of international relations is reciprocity, and right now, with that base that we've just heard about, Turkey is actually sending terror teams into Syria, and when they go back to Adana, then they would be subject also to hot pursuit, which would include that NATO base. The Turks have tried to cover themselves in the last day or two by saying that they're sealing their border, but we have a very informative article here in the Washington Post a day or two ago where we find that the Turks are only referring to the official border crossings, and they've got a whole set of other semi-official border crossings, which are actually run by the Turkish army, where the guerrilla fighters and terrorists are being allowed to pass in both directions.
Well, that is an interesting point you make, the involvement of Turkey throughout what's happening in Syria. Now, Turkey has set up a secret base, a nerve center, so to speak, which directly is a sort of a route between mercenaries being sent by Saudi Arabia and Qatar into Syria. Now, how do you think, what kind of a precedent is Turkey setting by undermining its own national security for the sake of NATO's own ultimate objectives?
Well, the old Greek proverb is, whom the gods would destroy, they first drive mad, usually with hubris, excessive pride, overweening ambition, and that seems to apply to Erdogan and unfortunately also Davutoglu. They've also got other problems, though. They've got not only Syria and the Kurds, but then there's also Russia. I think the big development of the last week or so is this landmark statement by Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov that the United States policy is to justify terrorism. The U.S. justifies terrorism, and, says Lavrov, the U.S. negotiating posture from Susan Rice at the United Nations is essentially the United States will continue to support terrorism until the Security Council does what the U.S. and NATO want. And Lavrov deplored that position. This is a very important moment, I think, in terms of clarifying what's going on. It seems to me now that it would be in order to follow up on that, some kind of resolution in the Security Council or the General Assembly at the very least, condemning the United States for supporting terrorism in the person of al-Qaeda, as you mentioned before. This has now gone so far that a whole country is in crisis in Europe, and it's Germany, as your account mentioned. The BND, the Bundesnachrichtendienst, has pointed to the overwhelming presence of al-Qaeda, and you've got the Frankfurter Allgemeine, Die Welt, and Bild-Zeitung, one of the biggest tabloids in Europe, all of them are taking, I think, important steps to show that the massacres in Syria are actually the handiwork of the anti-Assad forces, that it's not the army and Assad who are doing these killings, but it's the opposition, and they do it with the desire to provoke a foreign intervention.
Well, speaking of which, Dr. Tarpley, let me just cut in there. The massacre that took place in Hula, there are reports now by German intelligence services that it was carried out by Al-Qaeda. They have also admitted that numerous Al-Qaeda attacks have taken place in Syria, which have been blamed on Syrian security forces. Again, the U.S. is speaking of a massacre set to take place in Aleppo, which is again reminiscent of what took place in Hula. Now, speaking of which, these countries are putting in as much as they can when it comes to Syria, even their own integrity in the international arena. Do they even have a plan B if things don't work out the way they plan?
Well, their plan B is constricted in the sense that they fear possible retaliation from Putin and Russia, and to some extent from China. They also fear the anti-aircraft systems, the SAMs, the surface-to-air missiles that are in the hands of Syria. So their goal up to now has been to try to do this with special forces and sending in these swarms of terrorist guerrilla fighters. But that has not worked over the many months, and in the past week to 10 days, the great escalation, and the numbers that I've heard range from 2,000 to 3,000 foreign fighters to tens of thousands of foreign fighters who were expected to swarm the main cities of Syria at the same time that the assassinations took place last Wednesday. Well, that didn't work. The Syrian army did not collapse. The Syrian state was not decapitated. And in Damascus and now in Aleppo, those foreign fighters must realize that they can't hold the positions that they've taken, and if they try to stay there, it's going to go very, very badly for them. I would just point out, Corriere della Sera, big Milan newspaper, most important newspaper of record in Italy, already on Thursday evening, last evening here in Washington, said that the rebels have left Aleppo. They're fleeing towards the Turkish border, and the only people left are the citizens of Aleppo. Now, the New Yorker magazine correspondent, who seems to speak for the U.S. intelligence community, says the opposite. The residents have fled, and only people left are the fighters. In either case, you're absolutely right. Nobody should believe Hillary Clinton, Susan Rice, Victoria Nuland, these people, discredited as they are, lying as they have done the whole time. Any report of a massacre in Aleppo would have to be taken with a great deal of skepticism.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. That was Dr. Webster Griffin Tarpley there, author and historian, joining us from studios in Washington. Dr. Tarpley, it's always a pleasure having you here on Press TV.